stage of the Lawrence Family JCC Jacobs Family Campus. Tonight's event is a presentation of the San Diego International Jewish Film Festival. My name is Ryan Isaac. I am the Director of Cultural Arts at the San Diego Center for Jewish Culture. And here we are, deep into July. It's been 4 months of virtual programming, and it's wonderful to see so many of you still hanging around with us, still tuning in and supporting us. This has been quite an adventure, and really for me, it's been a treat to be able to sustain and develop our community this way, virtually. So once again, thank you all for being a part of this. I also want to thank our underwriters, underwriters of our film festival, underwriters of Arts and Ideas, of JLearn, of the gallery, of all of our CJC initiatives. It is through the generosity of the underwriters that we have been able to continue to program, and that we are able to look ahead and begin programming for the 2020-21 seasons. Thank you all. Also, at this time, really, financial security has never been more important, and the Lawrence Family JCC has launched the Financial Assistance Fund. You may have heard about this, seen this in emails, through the generosity of the Potiker Family Foundation. We have a $50,000 matching grant. The goal of the drive is to raise $100,000. We are more than 2/3 of the way there, and I know some of you who are with us tonight have contributed already. Thank you. There will be some information in the post-event email about how you can contribute, but please do, if you can, check it out, listen to the video from Julie Potiker, and read more about it. It's a wonderful way that we as a community are able to support everybody in this community and make sure that during these times, nobody is left without, that anybody who wants to participate in our programs or receive our social services is able to. A week from tonight, we'll be back with composer Donald Sosin. He is quite a fascinating musician, also a Beatles fan, and I know he likes to play around with some of his own Beatles remakes to the various classical eras. In particular, next Tuesday with Donald, we are going to have a little interactive activity where everybody gets to participate in composing a piece. So it'll be a kind of a different activity for everyone, and I hope you do join us. Tonight, we are joined by longtime film festival friend and supporter, Roberta Grossman. Roberta was the recipient of the Beacon Award in 2019, as bestowed upon her by our film selection committee. It was in 2019 that we screened Who Will Write Our History. She's been involved in numerous films on the production side, on the filmmaking side, directing, and she's with us tonight. Roberta, thank you very much for joining us from Los Angeles, and we're gonna kick right into the trailer of the film. Abby, if you can screen that for everybody now, please.
Somewhere, years ago, there was a mother who knew that her son was the cleverest, the most talented, the most beautiful. And now the brightest and most beautiful child in the world lies in a strange street. And his name isn't even known.
We should have seen the worst coming. But we did not want to know the truth. We did not want to see it.
Does the world know about our suffering?
Emanuel Ringelblum understood that he had a story to tell, and it was the most important story he would ever have to tell.
Almost all the photography that we have was taken by the German propaganda unit.
Will the Germans write our history, or will we write our history?
Let the witness be our writing.
Their goal was to write the history of the war from the Jewish perspective. And there was no time to lose.
The worst scenario was in the process of happening.
Writing becomes the only recourse. That was the ultimate act of defiance.
You don't really need guns to fight. You could fight with paper and pen.
This is what made this collection of documents so absolutely unique.
One thing is clear to all of us. Our devotion and constant terror have not been in vain. Among those taken away was Rabbi Ubabin,
Geli Sextin,
Israel Lichtenstein,
Leib Golden,
Abraham Levin,
Halina.
Emanuel Ringelblum.
Remember, my name is Nahum Gazivich.
I am writing this as a witness.
Just by a brief show of hands with those who have their cameras on right now, how many people saw this film and have seen it? It's good. Okay, good amount. So, Roberta, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
How are you? How's everything going in LA?
It's great to be cooped up with 5 people in a little teeny house and doing dishes and laundry and sweeping the floor and cooking all the time and working full time. Everybody's healthy. It's fine. It's good.
We found the same thing in my house, that the laundry and the cooking, did it exist to this degree back in February and prior?
Yeah.
So with the film, with Who Will Write Our History, when you first learned about it, when you read the book, I imagine, how did the process go for you, where it began as, on the page and became this documentary?
Well, I was working on another film about interwar period film, story set in Warsaw in between the 2 world wars. And I read a review of Sam Cassell's book, Who Will Write Our History. And the review was called his book a masterwork of history and a work of historical rescue in itself, and many, many other much high praise. And I went and got the book. And I said I went to get it because it was at this point, about 10 years ago. So we still did that. And I was 10 pages in, and I realized that this was the most important untold story of the Holocaust. Of course, it wasn't untold because Sam had told it, but Who Will Write Our History is a fantastic book, and it's also a very big, thick, and scholarly book, so not necessarily accessible to everyone. And I decided that I knew without any doubt at all that was what I had to do next, was to make a film based on Sam's book, Who Will Write Our History. And from that moment until when the film was released in 2018 was 8 years of work.
Was that your sole project during that period?
No. I did Above and Beyond with Nancy Spielberg somewhere in the middle of that, or right before. And then I co-directed a film called Seeing Allred for Netflix about women's rights attorney Gloria Allred. So there was other stuff going on, but it was a very steep hill to climb to figure out how to tell that very complex story in the confines of a feature-length film.
What was that like? What were some of the challenges then of unpacking such a scholarly book and making it accessible as a documentary?
Well, a book can just go on and on at any length, right? It's just if it's compelling and people keep turning the pages, there's really no limitation. With a film, if a film is more than 90 minutes, 95 minutes, 100 minutes, I'm sure most of you have seen that films seem to be getting longer and longer. But I don't know about you, but about 92 minutes, I'm like, okay, I've had enough. That's good, done. And so there's a certain, structure, a certain rhythm of a film. It can't go on too long. So a film has to have a beginning, middle, and end. It has to have a dramatic structure, whether it's a documentary or a dramatic feature. It has to have characters with arcs. And so I knew, of course, that Emanuel Ringelblum was the main character, but I actually chose to tell the film from the story from the point of view of Rachel Auerbach, for those who have seen the film. The reason I did that was because she was, of the 60 plus people who were members of the Oyneg Shabes, the secret archive, she was one of 3 who survived the war. She knew Ringelblum and was part of his milieu in Warsaw before the war. She was a member of the Oyneg Shabes in the ghetto. She ran a soup kitchen in the ghetto, and she survived to tell the tale. And she was writing. She was a writer, and she was writing during all those times, writing in her diary, writing sketches, and she was a fantastic writer. And she spent the rest of her life after the war really committed to keeping the memory of Ringelblum and the Oyneg Shabes and the Jews of Warsaw alive. So she wrote 4 books, I think, hundreds of articles, a lot of times writing and rewriting things from her diary that she wrote during the war. So it was a tremendous amount of really fantastic material. So she was the natural narrator for the film because she could tell the beginning, the middle, and the end, and in a really incredible way. But then I also had to tell the story of the Jewish world before the war because it wasn't all about death. It was about who died and what the culture was that was murdered. You have to tell the story of the war itself, the story of the ghetto, and then the story of the archive, and then the story of several people within it. So, and then the aftermath, of course. So it is fairly complex, but a good challenge.
Well, it was great. How much did you learn about Rachel in the research, and did you chase down any leads or go down any paths that you hadn't expected to, or what turned up for you?
Well, the main thing that turned up for me, it's a good question. The main thing that turned up for me was that she was somebody who was deserving to be very well known and had been completely overlooked. After the war, she started the Survivor Testimony Department at Yad Vashem. During her tenure there, she was responsible for collecting something like 50,000 testimonies. She was the one who convinced Gideon Hausner, the Israeli prosecutor of Eichmann, to base that trial on survivor testimony. She helped him select and shape those testimonies to tell a full story through those testimonies. And she wrote, like I said, she wrote many books and many articles. She was a great chronicler of Warsaw Jewry. So when I went to Yad Vashem, where she had worked for most of the rest, last part of her life, I went with a scholar friend and we asked to see the Auerbach archive, and the Auerbach archive came out to us in like 4 or 5 completely unorganized boxes, shoe boxes, just papers, photographs, clippings. Nothing had been digitized, nothing had been organized, nothing had been logged in any way. I think they've done it since then. I think it was a little embarrassing. And right now, Sam is at the tail end, Sam Casa is at the tail end of translating, I believe, 2 of her books with the Yiddish Book Center, or for the Yiddish Book Center. So she'll, between the film, I hope, and Sam's work in translating her writing, she'll hopefully become a little bit better known.
That seems to be the key ingredient to all compelling documentaries. And we've had a number of filmmaker conversations over the last few months, and it's that common denominator is the relatively unknown person who's deserving of the attention and the fame, and it takes the filmmaker to shine that light. So that's...
Well, it's a compelling reason, to... I find that to make a documentary, which is a difficult endeavor and not a financially lucrative one, I find that the best motivator is to want to address a wrong, or help correct a wrong, or, like you said, shine a light on something that has been obscured before to help preserve the memory. But it's not just Auerbach. I mean, it's all the members of the Oyneg Shabes, and of course Ringelblum in the main, who was the guiding light behind the whole thing. These are real heroes. These are heroes of Jewish history. These are heroes of Polish history. These are heroes of humanity. And they did something remarkable, and I really do believe it deserves to be known. So that's a very motivating thing.
I'm curious, is there a filter or a lens that you view through which you view the world, that when you discover somebody like this, when you encounter a story that should be told and needs to be told, has that always resonated with you? Or do you find yourself actively seeking it out for projects? Do your projects find you, really, or do you find them?
It's a combination. Yeah, it's a combination. I did a lot of when I graduated from the American Film Institute, there was cable existed at that time, and there were actually a lot of history programming, and I did about 40 hours of things like heroines of the Bible and rock and roll, whatever the interesting history programming that was somewhat popularized for A&E, Lifetime History Channel. And then I met Lisa Thomas, who I founded Katahdin Foundation with, which is our nonprofit. And she really wanted to make this film about Native American environmental justice activists. So that was really something that came to me. And then after that, I mean, our next film was Blessed is the Match, the Life and Death of Hannah Senesh. And I had read Hannah Senesh when I was in junior high and always wanted to make a film about her. And it just kind of goes from there. Sometimes Nancy, of course, brought her passion for the Mahal pilots, the American, Jewish, and Canadian pilots and South African, who went to Israel and helped create the Israeli Air Force and helped to win the 48 war. So it's a combination. Some things come to me and some things are long-held stories or people I love that I want to, bring to the fore, and some things you just stumble upon as you go about your life. But my radar is always out, is always up.
So back to Who Will Write Our History, the dramatic structure of it, and then the acting, to use actors to portray the people. We don't see that a lot in the documentaries. Not as often as we do the actual people. What was that like for you? Did you have a role in the casting? How active were you in that aspect?
I was directed the whole thing. I mean, it was no different from any other part of the film. I had a wonderful production company that I worked with in Poland, Match and Spark. They hired a casting director who really just worked around the clock for probably 6 months. He not only cast the actors, the main actors, but he cast every extra. In some scenes, there were hundreds of extras. And we were going back and forth. I was in LA, he was in Poland, and we were going back and forth online. He would show me 10 actors for a part, then there'd be, I say, I like this one and this one, this one, and then he would bring them and do a test with them, like as if I was in the room. And when I got to Poland, there were a few roles still to be cast, but it was a real collaborative process with that casting director.
In the trailer we hear it, in fact, and it struck me when I watched the film too, we should have seen the worst coming. Unfortunately, that when I heard that, I thought of us right now, and should we be seeing more or paying more attention? When you and I spoke before we started, you made the interesting, you drew that parallel between the pandemic and the ghetto. Would you mind sharing that a bit with everybody?
Right. So there's a kind of two separate questions in there, but I'll start with the pandemic. When the pandemic started, and when we in Los Angeles, I think we may have been one of the earlier states to shut down, California. It was such a strange, I'm sure all of you, we've all gone through this together, but it was such a strange and overwhelming time in which life one day was normal and the next day it was completely different. And I thought so much and was so pained for the people in the ghetto all over again, for the Jews of Warsaw who were forced into the ghetto, because it's this sense of forces completely beyond one's control taking over your life. And you don't know, and I think one of the most difficult things in the ghetto, and perhaps for us at the beginning and maybe even now, was you never know when the floor is going to stop dropping. Is this as bad as it's going to get? Is this as bad as it's going to get? And in the ghetto, of course, it kept on, it wasn't a day, it wasn't a week, it was almost 3 years that the people lived there, but it kept on getting worse. And Ringelblum says that in the ghetto, each day was like a year in normal times, that things were changing with what he says cinematic speed. It'd be like a jump cut to the next disaster or the next wave of deaths from typhoid or starvation, children in the street, all that. So I'm not trying to compare what we're going through to that, but only the sense of feeling like history, nature, whatever is interfering in what we perceive as our own self-driven, life.
It's an interesting comparison, I think, and
yeah, I think also, I mean, it makes me admire the people, Ringelblum and the others and the Oyneg Shabes even more. I don't know about all of you, but I find it hard to get stuff done. In a way, there's this kind of weight of everything that's going on, not only with the pandemic, but with our country, and the weight of fear and the weight of frustration and anger, and our normal supports and props not being there, being taken away. So I'm really amazed that Ringelblum was able to run this very sophisticated research institute in the depths of hell, and to motivate everybody to write, to collect writing, to have literary evenings, to put on concerts, he really was a remarkable person. And of course he wasn't alone, but he, this endeavor to stay human in dehumanized conditions is really, I think, quite remarkable.
I agree. I found his ability to extract the best from each individual and have a real purpose for the group he collected to be inspiring. And like you mentioned, Roberta, reminded me of a lot of what we're going through today, what we're going through at work at the JCC, where our jobs have changed. It's,
right.
The job descriptions that we were handed when we started are not what we're faced with today. And
it's that kind of ability to rise to the occasion is inspiring.
And a whole part of that arc and of the story that you tell. In preserving their stories and propping them up, what is the emotional experience for you as you go through creating the film and then finishing it, now being able to reflect and speak about it, to have a role in, ironically, to answer who will write our history, for you to help write the history that they were so careful to make sure they had a voice in?
I have to tell you, it's the thing I'm proudest of my entire life. It's the most meaningful thing that I've done. Of course, I have to say, because I'm a mother, besides having my children, that's de rigueur, that's required. But I'm so proud of the film, and I'm so honored that I was able to tell that story. And I feel like I did some measure of justice. Maybe I'm not supposed to say that, but I do feel that I did some measure of justice to those people. And Sam Cassow was pleased with the film, so that meant the world to me. So I'm very, very proud of it.
You mentioned that Sam is translating a couple of Rachel's books right now. Future projects in there, perhaps?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I think a dramatic feature about Rachel's role in the Eichmann trial would be interesting, but very depressing for many reasons. She was not a happy person. She had kind of a miserable life. And obviously, I don't mean just having survived the Holocaust, but afterwards and a bit before as well. Maybe. Thank you for suggesting it.
And I know you are in the very early stages of another project. Can you share some of that with us?
Yeah, sure. I'm working on developing a feature documentary about Abraham Joshua Heschel. Those of you who know who he is, one of the most important, if not the most important, Jewish public intellectuals, theologians, social activists of the 20th century. And I'm working with his daughter, Susanna Heschel, who is herself a scholar, Dr. Susanna Heschel. She's the head of the Jewish Studies Department at Dartmouth. And it's a pretty fascinating project and weirdly relevant. Since he was all about social justice and the prophetic voice in politics and in social change, and with what's going on now with Black Lives Matter. Heschel's on everyone's lips. I heard William Barber, Reverend William Barber speak. He mentions Heschel. I read an article today about a speech that John Lewis gave when he received an award at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and he mentions Heschel. Heschel is everywhere right now because he's he's very relevant right now, which, you know, whether that was the case when I started or not, things tend to work out that way.
Does that change the way you go about your approach at all? Does it make things any easier or more difficult? Or
it may, you know, it may make people more interested, may make funders more interested, because, you know, I really believe that there's a value in preserving and telling stories of history, whether they're, I mean, history is always relevant to me. To know our past, to know the stories is always meaningful to me, is always important. But funders, you know, they, you know, when there's so many needs, when there's people who are hungry or people who are homeless, there's so many pressing contemporary needs that for something to be relevant and to have an impact on the present day, of course, is important. And I think it will make it easier to raise funds for the film. Maybe among those who might not have thought it was a relevant film previously.
That's interesting. Has your work been interrupted at all during the pandemic? Have you been able to?
I'm just at the very early stages right now. I'm writing a grant to the National Endowment for the Humanities for a development grant from them. So that's been reading, writing, talking to scholars, and this has actually been a perfect time for that kind of work.
That's good. That's great. I just want to invite everybody who's with us, if anyone has a question for Roberta, please feel free to use the chat function. You can push that up and send it our way, and we can pass that along in this format. When you have a project cooking something in the beginning, in terms of your comfort level and preferences, do you usually have many other things going on? Or do you juggle?
I should. I was so usually, when I finished Who Would Write Our History was the first time in my filmmaking career that I hadn't already begun shooting another film. And that's, I just couldn't. Who Would Write Our History was so demanding and so engaging that I really just couldn't develop something else and start something else. But it really is, it's a practical mistake.
Mm-hmm.
As, you know, if I'm not making a film or raising money for a film, I don't have any income, right? And it's just sort of like, instead of things just rolling one thing to another, it's kind of like, it's a little bit of digging out from a hole, energetically and financially and everything else, but that's just the way it was. And that's fine. I mean, I'm working on other things as well. I'm working on other things now. A lot of things are cooking now. But there was a lull. I mean, I have to say that after 8 years of making that film and 2 years of traveling with it, I was really fried too. So actually this time of the pandemic and being home with my kids and cooking and gardening and all that has been really quite, I hate to say it, but because so many people are in such terrible, dire straits, but it's been restorative for me.
It's nice to hear. It's good to have some positives come out of this.
Yeah.
The final part of the archive, do you think that is ever going to be retrieved? Is there?
Yeah, so we know that there were 3 caches. There were 3, caches buried. We know where they were because Hirsch Wasser, who was one of Ringelblum's 2 executive secretaries and was one of the 3 people who survived, he and Ringelblum and the other executive secretary and the people who buried those caches, they were some of the very few people who knew where they were. But we know that it was buried. We know where it was buried. We know it's where the Chinese embassy is now. And the fact that Wasser survived was really quite a miracle. He was deported to Treblinka and somehow was able to jump off the train and survive the jump. The other executive secretary did the same thing and did not survive. They understood that there was this priceless archive buried in the ground in the rubble of the ghetto, and if they didn't survive, it might not survive either. And so many people had risked their lives and put all their hopes and dreams, and at least if they didn't survive, in the archive surviving to speak to the future. And not only do we have the Jewish story to be told from the Jewish point of view, but to be remembered as individuals as well. And then Wasser and his wife, Bluma, was the 3rd person who survived. Were hiding in an apartment or a bunker on the Aryan side of Warsaw. And during the Warsaw Uprising, not the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the Germans took the time they were still hunting for Jews, and they found this group of Jews hiding and threw grenades in there, and the only ones who survived were Wasser and his wife. So if he hadn't survived by those extraordinary circumstances, we might not know. And the reason that they did this was always this tension. Ringelblum was always worrying, if too many people know about the archive, somebody could be arrested by the Gestapo, tortured, and, they could spill the beans of where the archive was. If too few people knew, especially as time went on and they realized what was going on, the scope of what was going on, then nobody might survive and the archive might never be uncovered. So it was a lot of concern about that. And where did I start? Oh, will it ever be? Yeah, okay. So Rachel Auerbach was very instrumental in the first cache being found. And then she and Wasser and Bluma left for Israel in 1950, and it was shortly afterwards when the second cache was found. And I'm telling you the story because I think it relates to your question about will the third cache ever be found. So the second cache, which was the milk cans, which contained Lewin's diary and Ringelblum's diary, all these precious documents, construction workers, Polish construction workers were building new apartment houses on the site of the former ghetto, and they struck something metal. And they pulled out the milk cans, and they were very excited, as I think you and I would be as well, because at that time, it's part true and part anti-Semitic trope that, of course, all Jews were wealthy and had fabulous jewels and money to bury, but it's also true, which was, not true, it's also true that those who did have any valuables at all were burying them wherever they were, in ghettos and camps and, in workshops or whatever, so in hopes that if they did survive, they could come back and have something to start their lives with over again. So there was really literally a gold rush after the war where Poles were digging anywhere where Jews had been looking for their buried belongings. It's kind of a grim after tale of the Holocaust. And so these construction workers thought, well, rightly, they were not crazy to think, oh, maybe we've discovered great, vast wealth that's going to change our lives. And they opened up the milk cans and they were very disappointed that it was papers, and they started kind of tossing stuff. And the foreman of the crew came running up and said, stop, 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 put everything back, be very careful, I know what that is. He put the milk cans in his car, he drove them over to the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw, which existed then and exists now. It's where the archive has been ever since then. And the reason he knew is because he was a non-Jewish Pole who had a Jewish girlfriend in the ghetto, and they were engaged together with smuggling things. And so he knew about the archive. And if he hadn't been there, we might not have the treasures of, the really amazing treasures of the archive. And so it's quite possible, Sam thinks that it's quite possible that that third cache was found in this post-war digging and discarded. It's possible that there was a great deal of fighting where it was buried, which was at the brush workshop where a lot of the members of the Oyneg Shabes who survived the Great Deportation were working. And then during the uprising, there was a lot of fighting there. And then there was tremendous bombing throughout the whole quashing of the Jewish uprising. So it could have been destroyed at that time as well. So Sam doesn't think that that'll ever be found. There was an Israeli team that got permission from the Chinese to dig there for about 6 weeks, about 10 years ago. And they found a few scraps of paper, but they didn't really find anything. So although I'd like to believe that it's possible, it would be great to find. I mean, it would be amazing because these caches were buried sequentially, and this was buried right before the uprising. So between the Great Deportation and the uprising. So imagine what's in there in terms of how the ghetto organized itself for the uprising, the building of bunkers, the organizing of the young people who were preparing for armed resistance, and on and on and on.
It's fascinating. It's interesting stories in there. You mentioned Ringelblum and how cautious he was to have the right amount of people, given the number of people who survived. It seems like he was perfect in terms of the
luck, I guess. But I think the day before the 5 days before his bunker was betrayed, there were these Polish units that were basically hunting for the Jews, and they were Poles who would give up if they knew somebody was hiding somewhere, or they knew somebody was a Jew, they would give them up to the Gestapo for payments. And there was a unit that was hunting, and they got wind of Ringelblum's bunker. He was hiding with 31 other Jews in a really too large of a hiding place, in a bunker under a gardener's greenhouse. And the Jewish underground on the Aryan side tried to get him to move to an apartment or something smaller, hiding place, but his wife was really too afraid to move again. So they, of course, were all killed, along with everybody else there, and the Polish gardener and his nephew who were hiding them. But about 5 days before that happened, Ringelblum wrote a letter that was taken out by the Jewish underground. They were taking things out and bringing him things and all that. They basically asked the question, what if none of us survive, what will happen to the archive? This was very much on his mind. So it did survive, or a great part of it.
Thank you. That's wonderful, wonderful additional stories with it. Got one question about Yivo in New York, and why didn't anybody let him know where everything was hidden?
Well, didn't let Yivo in New York know where it was hidden?
Yes.
He did let Yivo in New York know of the existence of the archive and his final letters to them. But I don't think that he trusted, putting an X marks the spot kind of map into a letter that he couldn't be sure would arrive. But, it's certainly a logical question.
Makes sense, though. I'm sure there was plenty of concern, and I don't want to call it paranoia because it was much more founded than that, but had to be careful with everything.
Right.
Well, Roberta, I know you've got a family at home, and the day rolls on, the weeks roll on. We thank you very much for being with us tonight. It's great to spend time with you. Thank you for spending the time with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for doing it with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I want to give a special shout out to another filmmaker who joined us, Skye Bergman. Skye was part of our programming a couple weeks ago. She's the filmmaker behind Lives Well Lived. Skye, thank you for coming back. There's Skye. Let's unmute Skye so everybody can see her and say hi.
Oh, thank you. Hi.
Hi, Skye. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. And Roberta, was an amazing film. We watched it this past week, and it just moved me. And my partner Jeff, this was amazing to hear you talk about it. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And good news for Skye Bergman fans, the film Lives Well Lived is being streamed by AARP on Friday. We'll include those details with the notes from tonight's event that we'll send out in the next day or two. Also, if you want to watch Who Will Write Our History, it's available on iTunes and Amazon. I know I watch it on Hulu. So it's out there and available. So please do check it out. Thank you again, Roberta, for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for being with us tonight. It was wonderful to see you all. Stay well, stay safe, and hope to see you all next week.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Diego, thank you.